I'm here because I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm one that turned to the other side of the table as an investor. That happened, for the most part, about 8, 9 years ago. But for me, I thought about it because of my experiences, both positive and negative, raising money, working with investors, starting businesses, having successes, having failures, which is really part of the journey. I was interested in alternative forms of finance. And after doing software and internet companies for, I don't want to say how long now, I thought there was potential better, more open and fair routes for funding. So in 2011, I got involved with a small group, and we kind of forced ourselves into a leadership role. Z was obviously there with the administration at the time in DC. And that small group was influential and helpful on the legislative and regulatory side around a portion of what was called the Jobs Act. Who here is familiar with the Jobs Act? So 2 seconds on that, which is a significant part of what I'm going to talk about relative to crowdfunding, because there's multiple types of crowdfunding. The Jobs Act created new opportunities to do equity crowdfunding. So prior to the Jobs Act, crowdfunding was limited to things like donations and rewards, where people could buy or purchase or give money in return for, say, a gift. But the Jobs Act allowed that to move into selling of securities, whether that's lending or equity. What I focused on in my company, Crowdfunder, was equity crowdfunding for early stage businesses. So what I'm going to share with you is a bit about how that works. What are some of the opportunities and challenges? And I think one of the best things to understand as an entrepreneur isn't just the tactics, but what are some of the successful habits that good fundraisers have. And I would know that because I've both been a good fundraiser and a bad fundraiser, and I've watched a lot. I've probably helped facilitate, wow, I've lost track, online, thousands of fundraisers, in person, hundreds. So I've seen a lot of different approaches. What I want to share a bit is kind of an overview of what I see the successful traits are to people who are good at fundraising, which can and does coincide with crowdfunding or equity crowdfunding if you're doing a more formal financing for debt or equity. And so the things I'm going to share you are a little bit about kind of the way that people look at money who are very successful, the way they approach fundraising, and the way that that comes off about their business and about how they communicate with investors. That leaves them in a different space than some entrepreneurs that I see that aren't as successful. I also have some tips for how to position yourself and how to think about who you're going after and how you approach them. And then I'm going to give you the more tactical tips about crowdfunding. What are the platforms? What are the types? How do you approach that? And then I have some resources and a specific process that I've learned can really help you simplify a lot of the fundraising process and get to what works. So with that, first, I think it's really important for most entrepreneurs to shift. If you've never raised money, how many people have raised more than, well, who here has raised capital before? Okay, so most of the room. Who hasn't but is about to or is looking? So a good portion. One thing that I've learned along the way that I, for myself, didn't understand, which was a big shift in how I approach fundraising and thinking about working with investors, was the idea of money. And so the essential question came up to me that someone suggested, which is, do you believe that money is scarce, or do you believe money is abundant? And I watch people who are less successful at fundraising in a lot of ways believe that it's hard to get money and that money is very scarce. I'll say the thing that's very scarce is actually you, the really committed, deeply passionate, ideally impact-focused, driven entrepreneur who is committed, who's trustworthy, and is making great things happen. That's the scarce resource that needs to exist and can unlock capital. There's so much capital in the world looking for great places to be. So I want to encourage you to understand that and think about that. If you can position yourself in the right way, if you can understand that, then I think it helps shift a lot of the challenges that get in the way. So a little bit of the inner game of fundraising. There's something I always tell entrepreneurs, and this is something I've learned over time, and crowdfunding can plug into this, and I'll share how, which is at the beginning of your fundraise, before you've raised money, before you built a more formal or public board or advisory board, you have the opportunity to really aim high and go up. What's true about participation, investment, fundraising is people peg themselves at a certain level. If you start with a certain level of advisor or investor, generally you're going to attract people in that same perceived pool or optionality area. If you have significant brand name recognition type investors, people with a reputation for success, people who can make things happen for you, generally you're pegged there and other people will follow of that type. So the first thing I want to encourage is crowdfunding is a great tool to bring additional capital alongside, but you really want to think about laying this foundation and pegging yourself. Where are you going to peg yourself? So what I encourage entrepreneurs to do is always have this wish list of who are the best people in your space and area. How can you find a way to get to know them, add value, get into their circle, and peg yourself around that type of network? Because it'll likely be the case that you'll never change. You can go down, but it's very hard to go up. So aim high and focus on, say, 20 or so relationships that you might be able to cultivate. Now, that might not be able to be cultivated by you simply going out and trying to ask them to invest. By cultivate, I mean, how could you add value to this person or their organization and get in? So there's a lot of things that I do that I never get paid for or not about fundraising to make sure that I'm a part of circles that I think are impactful and valuable. Yes, there might be a benefit to me later, but it's also currency that I can pass along to great people. So I'm always looking for ways to add value and get into those groups that I want to be pegged with. And vice versa, people do that with me sometimes. So always have that hit list of the top people. Crowdfunding is an amazing tool to accelerate and amplify where you've pegged yourself. And so there's so much literature online about how to run a great campaign. I'm not going to go through that. What I'm going to say is at the heart of what you're doing is really amplifying a message that you should have already figured out for yourself, and you're translating online to scale. So the most important thing is where are you going to peg yourself? If someone's thinking about investing in your company and they're coming online and they've never met you, you need to have some compelling reasons why you have credibility, you have an easy to understand story, and that someone could quickly develop that trust and accelerate into considering investing in you. One of the best ways to do that, again, is to peg yourself to someone else credible as an advisor, as an investor. So getting that either lead as a formal lead or an informal lead is going to make everything easier in crowdfunding, but that's easier said than done. So who here is familiar with some of the different types of crowdfunding? Do you guys know there's generally 4 types? There's equity, there's debt, there's donations, and then there's rewards. I'm really focusing on the investment piece. So what I'm going to go through is a process that I've seen that really grounds you in a structure for success. And so it all starts, and it's really 4 main areas that I want to help ingrain in your mind around success. The first one is every great investment starts with a story. And this is something that I watch entrepreneurs rush into and don't really nail. You are communicating with an investor. An investor is faced with a decision, both conscious and unconscious, that can be really challenging. And what your goal is to not communicate as many facts as quickly as possible to convince them to invest. Your job initially is to paint a canvas for them to start to fill in themselves. The way you do that is you give them enough factual information or rational information that it's attractive and interesting to them. Market size, opportunity, your background, numbers, traction. But if you just had that stuff, you're not going to allow them to step in and start painting that canvas for themselves and understanding why this is compelling. You need to appeal to the non-rational side of their brain or the emotional side of their brain. And that's what stories really, really do well. So what story are you telling about yourself that's bigger than you? What story are you telling about your business that can connect to that investor in their own personal life? And how does that really infiltrate and get to everything you're doing? So I've talked about this. By the way, I have some resources online that I publish for free, some on a blog. I write for Forbes as well, so I post a lot of content. So I'm going to skip through a lot of this, and it's not going to be that quick because I think I'm trying to keep this to 11 minutes for this portion, and I'm probably almost out of time. But I put a lot of these in some free resources on Forbes. So if you just look for Chance Barnett Forbes, You'll see what I've talked about at story. I also have a sample pitch deck that keeps it brief enough, but helps you shape the story and gets to the critical stuff that entrepreneurs want to see. So this process is really first your pitch and story, and nothing else matters until you nail that, because that's the way in. No amount of facts, no amount of reasoning, no amount of like you saying that there's perfect market timing or thinking you have a best investment offer is going to really intrigue an investor until you have that portion of your formula right. But then you have to back that up. So that's the first step in your process. That should be a very significant amount of time away from fundraising. But you want to develop and iterate on that by doing what I would call low pressure feedback situations. So go to people that you want to pitch and tell your story to, but don't have those be the people that are writing checks. Have them be quasi-friendlies, but people who will challenge you and give you honest feedback. And then you can develop and refine your story as you go along. The best entrepreneurs practice. They practice to themselves and they practice to other people. So practice is going to be a really important part of refining your story and pitch. The next part of the process, remember when I said how important it is to aim high? The next part is once you have the story, once you're thinking about fundraising, once you're looking at crowdfunding, you want to find that lead investor and the right people to help validate and peg you in a great place. You need 20 to 50 really great people or names that you're willing to go out and do anything to get close to meet, to get in front of, and to connect with. 20 to 50 really solid people. That means you're likely going to very much have to get out of your own comfort zone. You're going to have to ask for introductions. You're going to have to do it politely. You're going to have to go to places that you might not usually be. And that's going to help you grow significantly. But it's a challenge. So that's the second part. You need to spend a significant amount of time saying, who are the smart strategic people I need to get to know, whether I'm raising money or not. And I want you to think this is a long game, because if you're going to be successful, these are going to be people you need and want to know for the next 10, 15, 20 years of your life. So communicate with them like that. How am I going to build a relationship with this person, not how can I take their money? And there's a huge difference in the exchange and what you'll get back when you communicate with other people, especially investors that get pitched all the time, with that kind of voice and that kind of intention. So that's the second step, build those targets. That's a hit list. What then you do is, and I call this hygiene of fundraising. Some people who aren't effective fundraisers go out and they start fundraising and they allowed it to just bleed into this kind of nebulous, endless amount of time. That's not a recipe for success. What successful entrepreneurs do is stack this into a very finite period. Here's my opening. Here's when I'm going to educate investors, say over 30 days. Here's a first closing after 45 days, which is an opportunity for people to participate. Here's a next set of meetings that I'll do. And here's a final closing, say at 60 or 90 days. I'm making up this timeline, but these are general timelines that you want to keep specific. You want to try and hold people to them. And it might sound at the beginning to yourself like you're making it up out of thin air, but guess what? All fundraising is made up out of thin air. People determine a time frame, they determine terms, and then they get market feedback, and then they push that to happen. So it's really important that you stick to that, and you ask and you force other investors to stick to that. That's in your benefit. And finally, I've touched on this in the process. And by the way, crowdfunding often forces you to do this mechanically. That's what's interesting about how people have built platforms, like what I built at Crowdfunder, like at Kickstarter for equity and rewards. There's a time frame, there's a ticker. These are all important switches that change people's experience and psychology and thinking about should they invest or not, are they gonna miss out, what does it look like? No one wants to be the first, no one wants to miss out at the end. How do you bridge that gap? So the last piece I'll leave you with on equity crowdfunding and more generally on fundraising is I want to encourage you, again, you're going to spend time looking and creating this list of 20 to 50 amazing people that you want to be close with, that you want to have involved, that you want to have invest. You're never going to show up, give them a pitch deck, pitch them, and get a check. And I've learned that sometimes, myself included, I think I'm so great, I'm going to show up and an investor's going to fall in love with me and then I'm going to get the check. That's not how it works. Your pitch deck, your story is to get a first amount of interest, not to answer every question and get someone to invest. Your first meeting is to develop personal rapport and allow them to poke holes, see who you are, develop more interest, potentially become closer to interested in investing. then they need to spend time filling in. You want them asking questions. You want them not knowing some of the information because you don't want to put every single thing in front of them at one time. And you want that to be a process. So there's an investor here in LA with one of the bigger early stage funds, Mark Schuster, Upfront Ventures. And he's characterized this into a philosophy he calls lines, not dots. You want to be a line of experience in an investor's mind, not a dot. Meaning, if you come in and you think you're just going to drop information and get a decision, that's not going to likely be very successful for you. If you create a series of lines, connecting those dots as a story, as a set of relationships, that's when you're going to find the people who really become interested and can develop that rapport with you and likely invest. So crowdfunding is a way of translating that into, I know I spent a lot of time not on the technicalities of the crowdfunding. There's a lot of information out there. If you do these things alongside with pushing it out, I think there's a huge opportunity for you to be successful.
You talked a lot about equity crowdfunding from the perspective of, equity crowdfunding, but not as much about Kickstarter and Indiegogo, that kind of thing. Could you make a comment about which one, or is either appropriate, like who should look at one or the other, or any of them?
Sure. So Kickstarter and Indiegogo generally are better services when you have a product that people can purchase, something tangible they want to be a part of, and they feel like they can become early and get involved and have an experience. Oftentimes, the companies that are equity crowdfunding, sometimes they're products, but they're not things that people would necessarily jump in and have a personal connection to or get personally involved with or innovate with. So oftentimes, if you're very early, you're building something that's tangible that people might want to receive, some type of consumer product, that's a great space. Not so great for service-oriented business, not so great for a software business, because there's nothing that people can grab onto where they're like, I have to be a part of this early. Equity crowdfunding, on the other hand, is a great tool for things like that are scalable, where people think they could invest and potentially have a scalable business being built, but they're never going to come and grab it and have an amazing experience. So rewards-based crowdfunding, Kickstarter and Indiegogo, really are about how to engage a community that would have an interest in something more than buying a product. They just go to a store and buy a product. You
mentioned that there are a lot of resources and a lot of platforms. What are the most interesting ones people should go look at?
Sure. So go check out for rewards and donation crowdfunding. On reward side, definitely go to Kickstarter and Indiegogo. If you're doing donation-based or charitable crowdfunding, check out CrowdRise. They're from here in Southern California, and some great people. If you're looking for equity crowdfunding, there's crowdfunder.com, there's Seed Invest, and then there's also, what's Howard's? Start Engine, sorry. And then if you're looking for lending, who are some of the leaders today? There was Prosper, there was, I'm not as familiar with the debt market, I'm not up on that, but they're pretty available, and I have resources of that on Forbes too that I've written. So
great, thank you so much, Chance. I really appreciate it.